Welcome to the Tech Talk by Microsoft EMEA. I'm happy you are in this call. Happy to see you here. Thanks for your feedback. And as you know, the Tech Talks are in English language. For sure, you can use also German for your questions, and I will translate, but the content will be delivered in English language. The Tech Talks, usually we are here on Monday at 11:30 in the morning. And today our topic is how to install Hyper-V and deploy and configure VMs. Hyper-V is one of the most important topics, in my opinion, in Windows Server, because Hyper-V is everywhere. It's not only in Windows Server, it's in the Windows client, it's in Azure, it's in Azure Stack HCI. So Hyper-V is the hypervisor provided by Microsoft. We want to focus on Hyper-V in Windows Server 2022. Most of the things you see in this session, you can also use in Windows Server 2019, 2016, and also in the Windows Client operating system. I mentioned we will focus on the Hyper-V installation and configuration in Windows Server. And this means Windows Server, Essentials, Standard, and Data Center. All three editions include Hyper-V, so we don't need any extra licenses for the hypervisor itself. And the hypervisor is not only for Windows workloads, it's also for Linux workloads, as you can see here. And we have many different tools for management of Hyper-V. We can use the Hyper-V Manager, we can use Windows PowerShell, we can use Windows Admin Center. System Center Virtual Machine Manager is an additional tool where we need an additional license. So the System Center Virtual Machine Manager is not for free. The rest of the tools is included in the Windows Server licensing. To talk a few minutes about the licensing for Hyper-V, it's important that we always license physical cores. So where you are focused on for licensing Windows Server for Hyper-V usage scenarios are the physical cores of your physical servers. So you always license the physical cores in your physical hosts, and the minimum is 16 cores. Minimum 16 cores have to be licensed. If your server has more than 16 cores, you have to license the additional cores. And if your server has less than 16 cores, you have to license the minimum of 16. When we install Windows Server without Hyper-V, the Windows Server is installed directly on the hardware. So this server we can see here will have some local drives, and the Windows Server operating system is installed directly on this machine. This is exactly what we see when we start with our demo. That we see a server that's fresh installed, Windows Server 2022, no Hyper-V is activated there. When we now activate the Hyper-V role, then the setup restarts the server twice, and the hypervisor is placed below the previously installed Windows Server. This is important because what we can see here is the architecture of a real hypervisor. If Hyper-V would reside above, then we would have a virtualization application, something we had in earlier times with virtual PC or VMware Workstation or virtual server. Hyper-V, what we have since Windows Server 2008, is a real hypervisor with a real hypervisor layer. This hypervisor layer is directly above the hardware, and on top we have the operating systems, including the parent partition. The parent partition is the operating system where you usually log in when you want to manage your Hyper-V host and configure virtual machines. For sure, you can also do this remotely. It's not necessary that you log in directly to the machine, but it's possible. This parent partition can be installed as a Windows Server with full graphical user interface, or it can be installed as an server core. Then we have a reduced footprint, we have a little bit more efficiency, we have a reduced attack surface, we have less patches we need to apply. We had two feedbacks, or a welcome message and a feedback about the audio in the chat. Feel free to use the chat for your questions. If you have any questions about our topic today, so Hyper-V in Windows Server 2022 or in previous versions, regarding licensing, regarding architecture, or regarding the live demo we will see in a few seconds, feel free to use the chat to bring up your questions or your feedback in English or in German language. So on this hypervisor layer, for sure, we can also place our virtual machines. Let's go back. What we see here, this configuration, server hardware with hypervisor, Windows Server 2022 with Hyper-V enabled, and one virtual Windows server with a Windows operating system, with a Windows Server operating system. This here is exactly what's included in the licensing of Windows Server 2022 Essentials. Essentials includes the usage rights for maximum 10 cores. So important is the server can have maximum 10 cores, can have more cores, but then we are not licensed correctly. So maximum 10 cores, maximum 25 users, 50 devices, and one virtual usage right. One virtual usage right means one child partition with Windows Server operating system installed. This is what we have in Windows Server 2022 Standard Edition. In the Standard Edition, we have Hyper-V and the parent usage, and two virtual machines with Windows Server operating system installed. This is what the standard licensing includes. When we license our host twice with Windows Server 2022 standards, so we license all the cores twice, minimum 32 cores, then we have 4 virtual usage rights. So we can stack Windows Server licenses. And when we stack Windows Server licenses, for sure, at a specific point, it's cheaper to use the data center license, because with the data center license, we have unlimited virtual usage rights on the licensed server. I think this is clear. This is only important to understand the next steps regarding the licensing. Now let's go to a live demo. Let's have a look at a live demo. And what we want to use is a machine here. It's a virtual machine. I will leave enhanced mode. This is a virtual machine where I'm using nested virtualization. So I'm using Hyper-V inside Hyper-V. I'm very often asked about this, why I should use this, or should I use this, and what's the impact. The interesting thing is that Hyper-V supports nested virtualization fully, also for production environments. And the nested virtualization has the advantage that I can provide Hyper-V hosts without delivering new physical hardware. So it's perfect for hosting scenarios. It's perfect. So for example, when you think about Azure, you could run in Azure a virtual machine where you have additional virtual machines. It's perfect for company scenarios where you need virtual machines, for example, for developers, for different company areas, for production, for testing, for training, and so on. And so you could provide dedicated hosts based on virtual machines, and so consolidate them on very, very powerful central hardware. So here I have a virtual machine. It could also be a physical server with 32 gigabytes of memory, 1 terabyte of disk space, and actually there's no Hyper-V installed. So to install Hyper-V, we'll go to Manage Add Roles and Features, and here via Manage Add Roles and Features, I'm able to select roles, and here we have Hyper-V. Important is to understand when I select Hyper-V, I should not install additional roles on this page here. So an Hyper-V host should never be also the domain controller or the DNS server or the DHCP server. These additional roles can be provided by the virtual machines. So when we go back to our architecture sample, here a domain controller, for example, could be provided by this first virtual machine. This would be possible. And the next one could be the file server. And there could be one RDS machine and so on. RDS is our topic next week. It's also a very, very important topic in Windows Server. But it should never be on this parent partition. This parent partition is only intended to be the machine, the OS installation for Hyper-V management and monitoring, and for providing drivers and such things for the hardware components we're using directly or indirectly for the virtual machines. So this is what we should always care about. So now important, I'm selecting Hyper-V here. And in the Hyper-V, when I select Hyper-V, I'll receive a message, oh, there are additional components that will be added, and this is fine for me. I want to have the management tools. I want to have the PowerShell components and so on. Okay, I will go to next, and I will not install any additional features. But when we, for example, build a cluster, and we had this topic last week on Monday, then for sure I have to install the failover clustering. Yeah, in this case, we only install Hyper-V. We'll go to next. I won't change anything in the virtual switches, in the migration or default stores. And I will choose restart destination server automatically if required, because I know the Hyper-V installation requires a restart of the destination server. So the installation starts. It would also be possible to install this via Windows Admin Center. So Windows Admin Center also provides all the tools for the installation of such a role remotely. We have a question and backup on host, if I'm correct, right? Question mark. The backup agent can be installed on the host. So when we go back to this picture here, the backup agent can be installed here. Also the monitoring agent, the antivirus agent, and so on. Backup agent here, but the backup server should be a dedicated other machine. So the backup server is connected to the backup agent. Here we have the agent, here we have the server, but the server is not running on the Hyper-V host itself, because no additional services, no additional roles should be installed there. It's only focused on providing Hyper-V capabilities. Hopefully this was clear regarding the explanation. If not, feel free to ask again. This is fine. So backup agents, yes, on the host. Backup server components, please not. It's not recommended, it's not supported. And in essential and standard, it has an impact of the virtual usage rights. If we install additional roles on the host, then we lose one virtual usage right in the virtual machine for the virtual machine. So we have no remaining virtual usage rights with essentials, only one with standard, and for sure unlimited with data center, because unlimited -1 is still unlimited. But also in data center, I wouldn't do this, but a backup agent is always fine. Yes. So my machine is restarting. I can read here, working on features, don't turn off your computer. So Hyper-V is now configured, is installed. We have the layer of the hypervisor integrated here. And so let's see what happened in the machine. When I log in again, I can here see the configuration, and a window will open for the finishing of the Hyper-V installation. This is this window. Here we can see add roles and features with it, installation progress, installation progress, and now this will finish here. When it has reached the 100%, then the Hyper-V installation is completed. And now we have the hypervisor running on this machine, and when I go to Tools and the Hyper-V Manager, we'll see, okay, I have a virtualization host, the D01, HV01. Actually, no virtual machines. We will create a few of them. And in the actions here, we can change the settings. So again, all these settings can be set by the Windows Admin Center. So let's compare both things. Let's start with the Hyper-V Manager. I will go to the Hyper-V settings and I will change the default path. I want to save the virtual machines in another location. I have a dedicated drive with the folder VMs. I will select this one here, go to the drive, E and the VMs, select this folder. I want to have live migration enabled. I want to share or use any network adapter. I want to have storage live migrations. I want to allow enhanced session mode. I want to allow Hyper-V replica, and I don't want to use the enhanced session mode as the default. Let's talk a little bit about these settings. First, live migrations. A live migration means I'm moving a virtual machine from one host to another host without any downtime. So live, the machine is running, the services are reachable, but the machine is moved. The storage of the machine is not moved. The storage of the machine is only moved if I only also allow storage live migrations. And for sure, when I migrate a virtual machine, I have to decide, is this a live migration or a storage live migration, or a live migration including storage live migration? So what do I want to move? The virtual hard disks or the workload of the virtual machine, or both? I can select this in this wizard. So live migrations are useful when we want to move virtual machines between hosts without any downtime. This is also possible outside a cluster configuration. Actually, today we don't have a cluster here in this live demo. Last week we have built a cluster. Here we are running a dedicated Hyper-V host, and this Hyper-V host will be used for virtual machines, for hosting virtual machines. And by checking this option or selecting this option, I could move virtual machines without any downtime to another Hyper-V host. So the enhanced session mode policy is helpful when I want to connect with RDP, remote desktop protocol like features without having any network connectivity to the virtual machine. Imagine you have created a new virtual machine, you don't have any network connectivity, and you want to copy some files into this virtual machine, or you want to change some settings, but you don't want to use the console connection. The console connection is always available. In the enhanced session mode, you have this RDP-like enhanced capabilities like clipboard sharing, like file copying from the local host and things like this. So enhanced session mode is very, very helpful, but it is not my default setting. And this is the reason why I have chosen this option in the user section, enhanced session mode, do not use. Because if I enable enhanced session mode in the server configuration and I enable it in the user section, then every connect to every virtual machine will be an enhanced session mode connectivity by default. When we think about the situation that maybe a server will restart for updates, or maybe we'll have an OS installation in a virtual machine, or we have issues with the virtual machine that will not start, then the enhanced session mode sometimes is not helpful, because in this phase where the integration services are not available, and yes, in Windows Server 2022, they are available very early, but if they are not available, it's not so easy, or you will not see anything on the screen. It will be blank. And this is the reason why my default mode is the console connection. And if I need enhanced sections, enhanced functionalities from the enhanced session, then I can switch to the enhanced session mode configuration. And so my recommendation is to select this option here. Replica is helpful to replicate virtual machines from one Hyper-V host to another Hyper-V host. So I often have the situation that I'm asked about cluster from customers that want to save money, that are saying, oh, it's very expensive to build this cluster. Do we really need 2 or more switches? Do we really need 2 storage systems? Do we really need this amount of nodes, and so on? And whenever we have the situation that we have discussions about pricing with a cluster, my recommendation would be to think about Hyper-V replica, so the replication here, because clustering is a technology that's relatively complex. We talked about this last week, and where you have to build everything redundant to that you can be sure that your failover will or should work in the case of an outage of a node. If you save money in the wrong place here and you have not everything redundant, a cluster can be worse than a single server. And so my recommendation is, if you want to have a cheap redundancy without automatic failover, because we don't have an automatic failover here in Hyper-V Replica, and where you can expect or where you can survive some delay between source and destination, then Hyper-V Replica is a great opportunity and configuration here. So this is the reason why I have selected exactly these settings here. I will confirm with OK. And it says, oh, yes, we don't have any storage location. So I have first to switch to allow replication from any authenticated server. And now it will work. It only says, oh, you should change some settings in the firewall to ensure that replication works. Okay, these were the Hyper-V settings. What we also need when virtual machines should access the rest of the network, we will need any Hyper-V switch, and I will create an external Hyper-V switch. And I will name this switch public. And it uses a network interface, the Microsoft Hyper-V network adapter. And I want to allow the operating system to share this network adapter. This means the host OS can also use this network interface to communicate with the rest of the network. This depends on your setup if you will keep this checkbox checked or if you will uncheck this. If you have dedicated interfaces for your host, then maybe you will not need this configuration here. In my scenario, my host only has one network interface card. So I will need this option to ensure that the machines can communicate with the rest of the network. Okay, I will configure the public switch here. And it says, okay, you only have one network interface card. This is exactly the card where you are actually connected. There may be an interruption if you now click on yes. Yes, this is fine for me because I have also access to the host via another management interface On a physical host, this should be a hardware-based management interface. On a virtual machine, this is the console I'm using here. Okay, so now let's create a new virtual machine. Let's go to new virtual machine. The virtual machine is in our default path. It's the demo VM01, the generation 2. It has, now let's go to 2 gigabytes of memory. We are using dynamic memory for this virtual machine. This machine should be connected to the public interface, and it has a default virtual hard disk. And I want to install the operating system from a location where it's already available. In the sources, I will install Windows Server 2022. For sure, it's also possible to install 2019, 2016, 2012 R2 because we have a downgrade right also for the OEM licenses, so we can also install previous versions of Windows Server. Okay, let's go to next and finish. I want to change some settings here, and we want to talk in detail about these settings in a few minutes. Let's give some virtual CPUs to the machine and change here some settings. Okay, I want to start this machine and connect to this machine, and I want to install an operating system inside this virtual machine here. So Hyper-V host was installed and configured. And now I'm working with the virtual machine on this Hyper-V host here. Let's start the installation. I want to use a German keyboard layout and installation language English. I want to install this operating system here. Here we need a key for the installation, and this key could be the Microsoft Automatic Virtual Machine Activation key. Let's switch to the English language version of this page, then it's easier for you to read. The automatic virtual machine activation keys, they are provided, you can see it here, by learn.microsoft.com, so previously docs.microsoft.com. And here we have the keys for all the operating systems that support automatic virtual machine activation. The requirement to use automatic virtual machine activation is to have an activated data center host or an Azure Stack HCI host where the data center keys are provided. And then the automatic virtual machine activation functionality on the host can provide the activation for the virtual machines. Automatic virtual machine activation was introduced in Windows Server 2012 R2. And what you have to know is that previous Windows Server host OS cannot activate newer or later Windows Server guest OS, but for sure a Windows Server 2022 can activate 2022, 2019, 2016, 2012 R2 guest VMs. So automatic virtual machine activation, I will not use this key here. I will just say I don't have a product key. It's also possible. For sure, I need a license, but I don't need a product key for the installation. And the keys I showed to you, these were the AVMA keys. They are public available from Microsoft in the internet, so this is no hidden secret, and you only can use them if your host is an activated data center host. So, server operating system is installed in this virtual machine. This is one possible way how to work with this. Now I want to switch to a Windows Admin Center view, and let's have a look at these steps in the Windows Admin Center. I will add this Hyper-V host first to the Windows Admin Center. And you know, the Windows Admin Center is the future tool for server management. So I will switch to German keyboard layout here, -4. So Windows Admin Center is the tool that's recommended by Microsoft. And we will see all the steps we used in the Hyper-V Manager are also available in the Windows Admin Center. I can go to the server with the name HV01. And what we first did, we first installed Hyper-V. The installation of Hyper-V is available when we go to Roles and Features, and we could select Hyper-V and then click on Install. This is available directly in the Windows Admin Center. Hyper-V, click on Install, it will be installed. Here it's already installed. When Hyper-V was installed, we started the Hyper-V Manager and we went to the Hyper-V server settings. It's available in the settings here. And here we have the Hyper-V settings. General, you remember the paths. Then enhanced session mode, you remember the configuration. You remember the live migration settings, and you remember the storage migration settings. So Hyper-V replica settings are not available here today. Maybe they are available in the future, or this is a point where you will switch to the Hyper-V Manager to configure the Hyper-V replica settings in this point here. Okay. So in the general setting, we have one interesting thing we didn't have in the Hyper-V Manager, the core versus the classic scheduler. Maybe you remember the news about Meltdown and Spectre CPU vulnerability. With Meltdown and Spectre, we had the situation that it was possible to get unwanted access to some content in the memory of the server that was preloaded because of some CPU optimization. And this vulnerability, so this hack is only possible because the OS, and it's not only Windows, it's also VMware, it's Linux, and so on, because the OS uses several cores and doubles the number of cores in logical CPUs when you have hyperthreading enabled. And with hyperthreading enabled, it might happen that different workloads are using the same core. And this happened with the classic scheduler. The classic scheduler allowed threads from different virtual machines to run on same cores. Regarding performance, scalability, and flexibility, this was perfect. But when Meltdown and Spectre came up, all the hypervisor providers realized this shouldn't be possible to ensure that nobody can use the issues of the hardware platform to access data he should not be allowed to access. And now, no worry, this is not accessing the data by clicking some file explorer or things like this. This is really only for high potential hackers, I would say. But for sure, if you are running a hosting business or things like this, then you have to ensure that this never will happen. And this is the reason why Microsoft switched from the core or classic scheduler to the core scheduler. And in the core scheduler, it will never happen that a workload from one virtual machine will share a core with the workload of another virtual machine. This means that we have some reduced flexibility. This means that we have some impact on the performance, but this means that we have highest security. But here you can see if you have I often heard this from customers that switched from Windows Server 2012 R2 or 2016 to 2019 or 2022, that they have seen some degradations in performance. This is the setting where you can switch. When you switch to the classic scheduler back, you have the previous performance values, but then maybe you have not the best security level. And again, this is not an issue where you are running virtual machines in a company where you know the workload that is running in the virtual machines. But if you are running hosting things or things like that, then you should always care about the scheduler configuration. This core scheduler was default in Windows Server 2019, and it's available as an update for Windows Server 2016. So let's go to the virtual machines here, because the next step was that we created a virtual machine. And we can see the virtual machine we created here in the list of virtual machines, the demo VM01. And the demo VM01 is running for virtual CPUs, 2 gigabytes of memory, 35% memory pressure, 760 megabytes is the memory demand. I think this is very helpful here compared to the Hyper-V Manager, that we have exactly this information here, including this small bar, because in the Hyper-V Manager, this is only available by clicking on the bottom of this thing here of the Hyper-V Manager. There we have the memory configuration, the memory details, the memory demand. In the list, we have the status, we have the assigned memory, and we can add and remove columns. Here we have the replication health, but we don't have any more details here. This is, from my point of view, I prefer the Windows Admin Center view. Let's create a new virtual machine via the Windows Admin Center. And it's different. It's the demo VM02. We have a generation 2. We have the virtual machine path. This is the default path we have configured. We have the number of virtual CPUs. We have the nested virtualization we can activate directly here. And yes, it's possible to have nested virtualization inside a VM that runs nested virtualization. So we can stack this again. We will use dynamic memory. I want to have between 1 gigabyte and, sorry, it's 2 gigabytes and 1 gigabyte. This is the area. I want to connect to the public switch. I want to add a storage, and I want to install an operating system from an ISO file we have here in the sources folder. Want to use the Windows Server 2022. And you can see similar steps we had in Hyper-V Manager, completely different visualization. Yes, this is a website in Windows Admin Center, and some additional things like nested virtualization and the direct configuration for the dynamic memory, because in the wizard with the Hyper-V Manager, we could check the checkbox use dynamic memory, but the configuration of the values, minimum and maximum value, this is only available via the settings afterwards. I will show you this later. So let's create this virtual machine. In the Hyper-V Manager, we created the virtual machine, and the virtual machine appeared immediately. Now we have the situation that the virtual machine will be created via PowerShell script. This PowerShell script is sent to the target host, and the target host will create the virtual machine, and then we will see an update here, and the machine is here. Okay, let's see how the connection works. In the Hyper-V Manager, it was a double click on the machine or right click connect. Here I have first to power on the machine, because when the machine is offline, I cannot connect. Power on the machine, And then I can connect here directly via the Windows Admin Center. And now the machine says, oh, this does not work. And it says, try to connect to a virtual machine. You must enable remote desktop services. The remote desktop services are not configured on this Hyper-V 01 on this target host. I can do this also via the Windows Admin Center, allow this connection. Now you can see the difference. It was possible to connect directly via the Hyper-V Manager because I was connected to this machine, and it's a different way to interact with the virtual machine. In the Windows Admin Center, we have the situation that the connectivity to a virtual machine is provided via RDP to the host, and then from the host into the virtual machine or onto the virtual machine. This is the reason why we need remote desktop configuration on the host, but we don't need any RDS licenses because this is only administrative activity. So I will restart this machine here, and now I can install an operating system. So the same capabilities, the same functionalities and tools, but we have the situation that the visualization is different in the Hyper-V Manager. So you can use the tool you prefer. You always have to keep in mind that the new features like nested virtualization, the core scheduler, and so on is only visualized in the new tool, the Windows Admin Center. So it can be configured via Windows PowerShell when you're using the traditional tools. You can use the mix of both. I'm doing this often that I'm using the Hyper-V Manager and the Windows Admin Center, depending on which functionality I'm using. And for sure, you can use the most things also in the Hyper-V in the Windows Admin Center. Except, for example, we have seen the Hyper-V replication configuration is not available here in the Windows Admin Center. So installation is running. Now, when I go back to the virtual machines, I can see I have back the list of the machines, the memory pressure, so the memory usage on the hosts, and so on. So I think this is very helpful to see what's the assigned memory, what's the memory demand. It's also helpful when I have a fixed memory configuration, because there I can see if I have virtual machines over provisioned, they could reduce the memory, or if they could perform better if I add some additional memory. So feel free to write into the chat your questions or also your preferred tool. Are you using the Windows Admin Center on your daily work? Are you using the Hyper-V Manager? Which tool do you prefer? Do you prefer PowerShell? Feel free to send some lines here via the chat. We are also streaming on LinkedIn. I have seen that there are some issues in sending me comments. So the preferred platform or our preferred platforms are YouTube. So when you go to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Sven Langenfeld or youtube.com/Manfred Helber, then you can see the live stream and you're able to send in your comments also. I will go back to the Hyper-V Manager on the Hyper-V host, and I will create another new virtual machine to show you again the steps. I will create a demo VM03. And the demo VM03, it's a generation 2. Let's talk about these generations. Important is to read that a generation of a virtual machine cannot be changed when a virtual machine has been created. There are ways to change this, but this is not only a checkbox. This is not only an option. This is a lot of work to convert a virtual machine, for example, from generation 1 to generation 2. So you should choose the best option for your workload. The generation 2 is for 64-bit operating systems with Windows Server 2012 or later, so our latest OS products. So when we think about the products that are in a longer support life cycle, that have a longer support life cycle left, I assume you will run Windows Server 2016, 2019, 2022. They are supported here in the generation 2. If you have previous or 32-bit OS guest installations, then you can also use the generation 1 still in Windows Server 2022 to be compatible with these previous versions. I would recommend whenever it's possible to use the generation 2. I will configure 4 gigs of memory for this machine, and I want to use dynamic memory. I will configure 2 gigs of memory, use dynamic memory for this virtual machine. Here we can see what I mentioned in the Windows Admin Center. We don't have an option to select the minimum and maximum amount. We have to do this afterwards. I will connect this machine with the public interface. I could configure the virtual hard disk, and I will install an operating system from a bootable image file here. So let's talk a little bit about the setting options of such a virtual machine. Let's go to the settings. And let's start with the virtual CPUs. With the virtual CPUs, I could configure a number of virtual processors for this machine. Let's do this here for this virtual machine. Let's configure, for example, 4 CPUs. If I reserve 100% of this CPU cores to the virtual machines, then I will, like the text says, reserve exclusively 4 cores of my host. Sorry, not 4 cores, it's 4 logical processors. So if I have hyperthreading enabled, these are 2 cores that result into 4 logical CPUs. I reserve them for this virtual machine. Where is this helpful? When you look, for example, at Microsoft Exchange, then Microsoft says the best way to run Exchange Server on premises is to install it on a physical machine. But if you prefer the installation inside a virtual machine, you should be sure, or you should ensure, that you reserve the amount of cores you configure for the virtual machine on the physical host. And this is exactly this value here. Exactly this value ensures that this amount of cores is reserved. Because if we configure this with a 0 here and say, okay, it's dynamic from 0 to 100%. And let's see how many virtual CPUs my host has. Then I can see this host has 4 cores, 8 logical processors. So I could configure a virtual machine with maximum 8 logical processors. So let's try this. Let's go up to 8. This is possible. Let's go up to 9 or 10 or more. Then I will see, okay, it's also possible. So, and I will realize this is possible with up to 1024. Let's configure a virtual machine with 64 virtual CPUs. Or let's only configure 10. Let's configure 10 and apply this and say OK. And then we want to start this machine. Then I will see an error because it says it's not possible because the host only has 8 logical CPUs. So I cannot configure a virtual machine with more than 8 virtual CPUs. When I go down to 8, then it will be possible to start this virtual machine. And now when we think about the cores, it's easier to see them in the Windows Admin Center. In the Windows Admin Center, we can see, oh, there's still a wrong information here. It still has the 10 cores I configured previously. Let's refresh here. Then I should see the 8 virtual processors. Now it's the right value here. So now I can see I have 3 virtual machines. When I sum this up, I have 16 processors. I only have 8 logical CPU on the host, 4 physical cores on the host. This means if I have configured this dynamic CPU allocation from 0 to 100%, on this host, I can configure an unlimited number of virtual machines, and each virtual machine can have maximum 8 cores. If I configure 10 of these virtual machines, I have allocated 80 logical CPUs, and each of the virtual machines will use something like 10% of the performance of the host. So this is the idea of virtualization, that I bring things together, that I consolidate things, and I also will have some over provisioning there. For sure, this must be suitable for your workload. And Exchange says, I don't want to have this over provisioning. When I am the Exchange server, let's say, for example, the number 3 here, and I have 8 virtual processors configured, then I want to have a reservation. And on my host, this would mean that I cannot start any additional virtual machine. If I would reserve the 4 virtual processors for the demo VM01, then I could start the demo VM02, but not the demo VM03, because I only have 4 logical CPUs left. Hyper-V itself can provide up to 1024 logical CPUs to a VM, but this requires that I have these resources on the host. Otherwise, I cannot provide them for the virtual machine. Okay, let's go back to the settings, because CPU is more interesting when we expand this here, because in the, I want to turn off the machine to show you all the settings. Turn off the machine here. Let's go to the settings, because here in the CPU or in the processor, we have the compatibility. Compatibility is important when you want to live migrate a virtual machine from one host to another host. Many people think live migration is a cluster-only feature. This is not true. With shared nothing live migration, we have since, I would say, Windows Server 2012. It's also possible to have a live migration outside the cluster. But what we always need is a CPU compatibility between the hosts. Because when you move a virtual machine from a CPU that has this feature set to a CPU that has this feature set, then you can imagine that the virtual machine will miss features on the target host. And it's not possible to remove CPU features from a running machine. It's not possible on the host, and it's not possible on the virtual machine. So to ensure that this will work successful, one thing could be to have identical CPUs on both sides, so the source and the target. This would be the best choice. If you select this option here, migrate to a physical computer with a different processor version, in this case, the CPU feature set will be limited, but it will not be limited to the set with the maximum features where both CPUs are compatible. If we check this checkbox, the CPU features will be reduced to an absolute minimum. And so this has really huge impact on performance. I would not recommend to check this checkbox, so only if really needed. In the memory, we have the dynamic memory. For sure, I could say, okay, let's have the area between 1 and 2 gigabytes, or maybe 4 gigabytes. In this configuration, this means The virtual machine will start up with 2 gigabytes of memory. Then when the virtual machine is started, it will try to work in the memory between 1 and 4 gigabyte. If the virtual machine has free space in the memory, it will retain it to the host. If it needs additional memory, it will ask the host for additional memory. And so this is the area where the machine works. There's a buffer configured of 20% to ensure that the virtual machine has not to ask for every megabyte of memory, but it always gets some blocks of additional resources to optimize the performance. So we can see there are a lot of detailed configurations, and all these settings for sure are also available in the Windows Admin Center. Here we have a different view, but if we switch again to the Windows Admin Center and check the machine 03, we also have the settings, and we have things like memory, including dynamic memory settings. Here, this configuration, we have the CPU, so the processor, we have the boot order, and so on. So these functionalities are also available for or via the Windows Admin Center. For sure, you can spend much more time with Hyper-V, but I hope this hour was helpful for you to see how to install Hyper-V, how to configure a virtual machine, and what's the difference, mainly the visualization between Hyper-V Manager and Windows Admin Center, so that you can select your preferred tool. Hopefully, we will see us next week when we talk about how to configure remote desktop services with Windows Server 2022. Next week, also Monday, 11:30, we will talk about remote desktop services in Windows Server 2022. On October the 25th, we have a TechTalk Q&A, so 1 hour for your questions, and for sure I will again bring some interesting topics from my side. On October the 31st, we will talk about how to install and configure Active Directory domain services and Windows Server 2022 Active Directory domain services and DNS. And in November the 7th, we will talk about Azure Stack HCI and the version 2020 H2, so the latest Azure Stack HCI version that was released last week. And I can promise you there will be a lot of interesting topics there. So looking forward to see you in the next Tech Talks. Feel free to send in your last questions and your feedback and comments. And then I will finish this session, say you thank you for your time. And for sure, all the Tech Talks you can view on the YouTube channels where you're watching now, and they are also available on demand. So thank you for your time. Have a nice day. See you next Monday. Bye.